Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Todd and Taylor Show. I'm Todd A.
I'm Taylor Trask.
And this is, we're going to call this Coffee and Kingsman, sort of. Not really. I'm still drinking coffee. It's still Sunday morning. We do certain podcast episodes, which we call Coffee and Comics. And this morning, we were talking about Kingsman 2, The Golden Circle, which I believe just came out this weekend, right? It hasn't been a week, has it?
It has been a week, yes.
Oh, it has been a week. Okay, so we are capturing this like the second weekend of it.
Yes.
And we'll release it promptly this episode. So
and the only reason we're doing that is because many of you out there who've listened to this who know my love of Kingsman might be like, you didn't see it opening night? No, and the only reason is the same group of people who saw the first one with me were actually in town this last week. And I thought, what better way to see the second one than to bring them out and actually go to the theater and kind of relive some of the magic of the first one. So that's what we did. We saw it on Thursday night, and I've had a few days to digest. So
excellent. I saw it. I saw it Wednesday night
of this week.
Yes,
so we're both second weekers. Well, yeah. And, in some ways that's actually good because I feel like, especially movies like this, it needs a strong second and third week audience. So it's, even though I freaking couldn't wait for this one, being able to like throw my money into that second week pot actually feels a little good because it helps helps pull it through. And the stronger the second week, the stronger the life cycle, and the more money they're going to devote to other movies and things in the franchise. So I think that's
so you. Yeah, so you as a fan feel like you were really helping them out by the second week.
I do, yeah, because we've become such a front-loaded movie culture as of late, where if that first week, it's basically all things are pointed that first week, and then all trailers and commercials just stop after that opening weekend. It's bothering me a little bit because it's like, yeah, you want the excitement of a rabid group of people watching the same thing together, but I remember, go back to the time from our youth when a movie was in theaters for 3 months and you'd still, even a month after the fact would still see a trailer or two, depending on the movie. So it's just, I kind of want to leverage whenever I can, that to some degree.
Exactly. Well, let's just jump right into it. What were your first impressions of it? I mean, as you sort of front loaded here, you have mentioned Kingsman many times on the show. So I felt like we had to do a dedicated episode. Go
and play the Todd and Taylor Show drinking game and just take a drink every time I mention Kingsman.
You will be wasted. But yes, first impressions.
First impressions. So I guess here's what we always have to go back to. You can't just judge this movie as a standalone movie. You have to judge it in comparison to the first one. Because it's such
the sequel dilemma.
Exactly. And some people may say, well, that's not fair. It should live and die on its own merits. I'm like, yes. And it can, but this movie, that first one was such a special thing and was such a departure from what we're used to, but still, was something that tried to harken back to a Roger Moore or even Sean Connery era James Bond. That it had to work on so many different levels that the second one, you have to judge it by those same standards. I would say, and what I've told people, if the first one on a scale of 1 to 10 was an 11, I would say this is a solid 8.5. So again, great, was happy with it, but didn't quite capture what the first one did for me. And maybe that's just the fact that the first one was the first one and you only pop your cherry once. But I also feel like there are things that this one did that, and we'll get into the details in a second, but there are some, I would almost say even more logistical challenges that hindered this one where the first one didn't have that problem.
Well, that's interesting because I kept seeing a headline, I know it was just one publication that kept re-upping their article where their comment was, the second one is more a parody than a satire. And I kept thinking, well, I didn't even think the first one was a satire.
Yeah.
So I don't, I felt like both of them, the whole Kingsman franchise was not necessarily a satire of Bond movies. I just thought it was its own interpretation. So
exactly. Yeah. Anyway. Perfectly said. I think slinging around the words, anytime you hear like parody or satire in this regard, it's just people grasping at straws, trying to sound intellectual when they're not. So, I wouldn't even go down that road. Like it's not. It was very much its own thing, and you can tell with most Matthew Vaughn films. Matthew Vaughn wants to, even Stardust, for God's sake, like he wants to do what he's interested in, and at this point, he's interested in sort of homaging some of the things that he liked about the Roger Moore and Connery Bond movies, but couching it in a modern context, like doing batshit crazy things that you're like, both in terms of the soundtrack, but also the action sequences and stuff. And so if you liked the first one, if you loved everything about it, you will like this one. I would also say that if you were like so-so on the first one or didn't get it, you're not going to get this one at all. So don't, we've kind of hit that point where the true fans may proceed and everybody else is kind of left behind, which is, for the franchise good, because then they can always dip into that same pool. But I think if you want to, we could go off on a side conversation about genre in general, meaning like more and more, I feel like movies of this, the big budget movies are built for the people who understand the IP, right? They understand what it is, why they're going, and these are very much catered to those fans. So this Kingsman movie was catered to me. If you watch the first one and you like the first one, there are a lot of things, even throwback lines that I really liked, but also just character moments that are very much built on the foundation that first one delivered. A couple of things right out of the gate that I found interesting, and this goes back to the logistical challenges. I wish the studio had not told us ahead of time in bright, shining letters that Colin Firth was going to be back in this one. I think if that wasn't the case, and if they could keep that secret, which I kind of get at some point, there were so many locations and production people that, it was going to get out sooner or later. So my guess was they're just like, let's just turn that into a selling point. Let's not even bother trying to keep that a secret. We'll sell the movie with him attached, because there's going to be a certain demographic that are going to go if he's a part of it again. But if they hadn't done that, there's a whole scene, and we're going to get a little spoilery, and this is in the freaking trailer, so this particular thing isn't a spoiler.
Yeah, we'll try to save all the spoilers for after we get through the intros and the sort of general story.
Exactly, but this is clearly in the trailer. It's clearly
it's in the trailers
out there. There's a scene where Eggsy and Merlin are in sort of a bunker, and the two-way mirror flips, and they see Colin Firth's character shaving in the other room. Imagine how much more impacting that would be if we had no idea, right? And all of a sudden it flips on, and it's just like, wow, there he is. Like all of a sudden, like, the energy would be amped up. So I like little things like that. Another thing that kind of bothered me, and this, I need to be careful because this does tread into kind of spoilery territory.
Well, let me ask you a question about that. How much of that do you think you mentioned that they might put that out there because they think there's a big portion of the audience that's going to go see a Colin Firth movie, but how much of it is just in this Game of Thrones world in which we live in, that if they tried to keep it secret, it would eventually come out? Are they just trying to short circuit that, or is it?
Yeah, I think it was definitely that. But then I think the PR department's like, well, if we're going to do that, we might as well slather his name over everything. It will help us sell the movie, honestly.
And that's the other thing, is that what's interesting about that is in those trailers, they, you're right. Like we see that scene of them having the reveal of seeing Galahad, and where I could understand it if you say, okay, well, Samuel L. Jackson is not in this film, and if we try to sell it without him and without Colin Firth, who's going to go see it? But it's like they didn't bring up enough Halle Berry, Channing Tatum, Pedro Pascal, who I didn't even know was in that damn movie.
And Jeff Bridges, basically.
Bridges. It's like, man, they could have just pushed this whole movie with those,
Julianne Moore, for God's sake.
Yeah, Julianne Moore. Oh my God. I don't know why they were sort of the secret, like they were the subtle surprises. Anyway, sorry. So without getting too spoilery, what was your other notice?
Well, the other big thing, and they've admitted this, so this isn't like a speculative thing. This is true. The role that Pedro Pascal is playing was meant to be the other half of Channing Tatum's role. And so Channing Tatum was cast to be this kind of fully formed character. Yeah. And Channing Tatum's scheduling got in the way. So like halfway through either production or through the even pre-production, they had to go, okay, well, and Channing Tatum definitely wanted to be part of it. So they're like, okay, we'll film this stuff, but then to accomplish the rest of it, we're going to cast Pedro Pascal in his best Burt Reynolds impression and throw him in like, the second half. So there's a disjointed thing that kind of you feel where you're like, okay, we don't really get to know Channing Tatum's character as much as we should. We don't really get to know Pedro Pascal's character as much as we should. And yet especially on Whiskey's side, who Pedro Pascal plays, there's something that happens that you're like, oh, and it's fun, but you're like, this would have meant more if it had been the same character all the way through, if that thread had been, spooled all the way through. So I feel like that, if that had been a little bit more solid, it would have felt a little tighter. So you kind of see like,
that's so interesting. I didn't know that. And yeah, when we hit our spoilers section, I will bring up something there because that's a really big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's like, I feel like this movie kind of suffered a little bit from the, we got to do a sequel. It's got to be bigger. It's got to be, but we still have to do some of the things from the first one. So it kind of, I don't want to say it was bloated because it wasn't. I mean, the first one was bloated by that standard. Like, and that was what made it so fun, right? So there's not like, I think just packing as much as you can in is kind of par for the course now in this franchise. But there were some things that I'm like, man, if they had just kind of gone the simpler road, it would have felt a little cleaner.
Well, that's super interesting too, because I didn't feel like this movie did not feel to me like they were trying to go bigger, like do that second movie that sort of, blows out the first one. Mm-hmm. And I say this as like someone who mostly enjoyed the first one, but is definitely not like as huge a fan as you are. Mm-hmm. And I've only seen it once. So I'll just back up and give my first impressions, which were, I actually think I enjoyed this one more than the first. Mm-hmm. And now again, that could be just the sort of, the non-super fan watching it, but it almost worked to me on the first one introduced the characters of Kingsman to me. And as I've tried to pick this apart this week, and why did I enjoy this more than the first one? I really think it boils down to I really disliked Sam Jackson's character in the first one. And in fact, I think that guy is brilliant. I love so much of his work, but he is just in too much stuff for me. Like I didn't care to have him in the original Kingsman. Now, I wish that had been a different actor.
It's funny you say that because he was one of the highlights of the first one for me, right? Like going into it, knowing he was in it, I was actually hesitant too. Because one of the best things about the first one is that I went in with maybe a trailer and barely anything else. Like I knew who was in it.
This is just a great irony too. Yeah. So sorry to interrupt.
And so it's like, no, but I went in, and so it was one of the first times in a long time that I went into a movie not knowing the whole plot ahead of time via spoilers or just my own research. It was just like, holy crap. Like it just kind of washed over me. But going into it, I was like, man, Sam Jackson's the villain, really? But you had the same initial feeling as I did, which is like, man, we see this guy in everything all the time. Yeah. It's like, I mean, kind of as a counter example, he is in that Miss Peregrine's School of Peculiar Children movie that came out last year. He's freaking in it. And it's like, it could have been any other British actor, but they freaking put Sam Jackson in it with a British accent. It's just like, really? Like, that's an example where that falls completely flat on its face. In Kingsman 1, he not only does he do this thing with this character, and I'm not even talking about the lisp, which didn't bother me at all. But like just what he did with the character and his his squeamishness around violence, and the fact that he has this kind of putting Sophia Boutella in as his sort of henchman sidekick was brilliant, because there was this kind of like father-daughter, but also are they dating? Like you never really knew
the relationship.
Creepy. Yeah. And so there's like this crazy, like, did he adopt her and because she was disabled, or like, what was it? But they never explain it, and they didn't have to. And it just sort of, that intrigue was part of it. And just, I don't know, there's a lot about what he did that Julianne Moore was completely fine. Like Julianne Moore did everything that she was supposed to do with that role. I just think that Poppy as a character wasn't quite as fleshed out as Sam Jackson's, in that regard.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And what I think is so interesting about this irony is that you are a huge fan of this first movie, and you went in really pure. And then I have this totally weird experience of I think it was even in Hall H. I think we went into Hall H at San Diego Comic-Con the year this came out, the first one, to see like the Kevin Smith panel or something. And we just walked in at the time where the Kingsman panel was starting. Cause there's this thing of like, once the big, huge, Marvel and DC and Sony panels are done, everybody leaves and you can kind of just walk in to Hall H.
Yeah.
And they'll see, and you don't have to leave. They don't clear it after every panel. So we just kind of like suffered through, we were like, whatever, we'll just see whatever's here first. And then we'll see Kevin Smith. And, cause I think that's what was going on. And so it's like, Colin Firth and Matthew Vaughn and Sam Jackson walk out and we're like, what the hell is this movie? And they showed some clips and they specifically showed that sort of first scene where the
bar.
The one where they like kill the professor or whatever.
Oh yeah, the opening sequence.
Is that the opening of the movie?
Basic. Well, no. After the opening credits, it's like it's in the mountain chalet where
the mountain chalet scene.
Pirates of the Caribbean is like an agent. And he comes in and everything.
Yeah. So that's what they showed, and I at the time I was like, "What? I got to see this. This is amazing," Yeah. And then when it came out, I just didn't really bother. And then when I finally watched it at your house, I was that was when I finally sat down and kind of absorbed the Sam Jackson character. And actually, it's fun. That's another funny part of the story too, is that we started watching one morning when I was hanging out with you, and I had to get on a plane, and we didn't get to finish it. And so I came home and finished it. And it might have just been that break where, like, I remember watching the end of it and being like, I hate Sam Jackson. This is driving me crazy.
Oh man.
Maybe if I just sat down and watched it all in one. Actually, maybe if I'd gone and seen it like opening weekend, I would have turned out into such a as big a fan as you are. But anyway, sorry to derail us there.
It's all important context.
Let's start with that. Talking of opening scenes. The opening scene of this, we gotta talk about, because we can talk about it in a non-spoilery way. I feel like it doesn't matter what your impression of Kingsman is. You got to see this opening scene.
Yeah, it is the first time.
So cool.
Well, it was cool in terms of the execution, but like let's just get this out of the way. The first time, I think, since Batman 1989 that a Prince song has been used in a freaking movie. That to this degree, and Prince songs have been used in movies before, but very, very sparingly and usually not the hits. So all of a sudden there's this whole sequence, kind of with the same intensity of the church sequence from the first one, but freaking Let's Go Crazy is playing in the background, and in an organic way. Like, it's really fun, which is great, because if you remember, the first one opens with, Dire Straits' Money for Nothing, while like a helicopter rolls across the desert. So right off the bat, the first one's like, oh, this is going to be fun. Like, we're going to really lean into this. And again, in the first one too, there's that amazing last final fight sequence to freaking Casey and the Sunshine's band, Give It Up. Right. So like, the movie's already established itself as like, oh yeah, we're going to play your favorite hits while we show you cool stuff. And so Kingsman 2 opens with exactly that. And
what's so great is, so it's so many things. It's a fight in a car.
Yep.
In Eggsy's car.
Racing down the London streets.
With slight spoiler here.
Actually a pretty big spoiler, honestly, because it's not that clear in the trailer that's who this is. But
gotcha. But it's not a big character, but it's a character who's in the first that we have presumed dead, who's come back in this enhanced state with a robotic arm. And I love the way that it's sort of naturally shown, where he's typing on the computer in the back, and in the midst of the fight, like the fight starts and they punches the music. And so that's where Let's Go Crazy comes in. Is like, it is actually the natural sound in the car as this fight's going on. And you're right. It does have that intensity of the church scene in the first movie. I think what makes it cool is it's really just about the 2-person fight.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not one of those expansive Kingsman fights, which we will get later, where, a handful of people are taking on like hundreds of people.
Yeah.
But it's just these 2 guys slugging it out in the back of this car. And at moments it was like a Jason Bourne, like real physical, like kinetic fight. But then you're just kind of put on notice, like, nope, this is going to be Kingsman crazy. And, you probably will not like this description, but as I was watching it, I went, "Oh, Kingsman makes so much sense to me. It is the English Fast and Furious."
Oh, interesting.
Not so much because of the car or whatever, but
Mhm.
because on How Did This Get Made, the podcast, one of they always have Adam Scott on to discuss the Fast and Furious movies, and one of the hosts in discussing one of the Fast and Furious said they're superhero movies about superheroes with no powers.
Mhm.
And in that fight, I was like, yeah, that's what it is. Like, they don't have superpowers, but it's basically a superhero movie where, he's the door, of course, gets knocked open of the car, and they're, pushing each other out, trying to, and the way they each hold on while they're being pursued by these like basically tanks with like machine guns and stuff. How that all happens is so unrealistic and unbelievable and stuff, but that's what makes it fun.
Well, there's a lot you can see where we are with CGI, right? Because so many of those sequences, especially when the camera pans way out and you kind of see the overhead of London streets, all of that's CG. But it was sequenced in such a great way you either didn't notice or didn't mind, and it really kind of added to the intensity of the and again, you saw none of this is out of place. You saw some or a lot of the same kind of techniques in the first one, so it was very much a like, hey, it was almost like just a reassurance, like to the fans, like, hey, if you thought that we'd be going in a different direction, rest assured, this will be exactly what you were expecting. With freaking Prince. I mean, that had to set them back like $5 million. I mean, that ain't cheap. I mean, honestly.
I kind of wonder if that's why we haven't heard Prince songs to score scenes so much, is because maybe he wouldn't license them. And
he wouldn't. No, that's a known thing.
So after his death, his estate is licensing them now.
Yep. Well, but they're doing it.
Great news.
It's great news, but it's even greater that Kingsman is like the first one out of the gate to really take advantage of that. Like that was as sort of as surprising and as awesome as Thriller and that Stranger Things trailer.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, holy crap, they got, and again, Warner Brothers, they're probably like, yeah, you can have it for like $10 million. I mean, it was probably pretty pricey, but it's cool. And, let's be honest, like there's a whole other side argument to like, should that happen to an artist who's passed away? And I'm like, with a song like that, which is so much ours, I mean, it's so much part of the public's consciousness as it is just his own creation. Yes, it's time to let that out of the catalog and, put it with some movies and let's move on,
It was, it's like I said, watch that scene and you will be hooked into the movie, I think. So with that, like, let's try to describe the story. Like, can you give an overview of that? Like, what's the story of this movie?
And again, we're gonna do spoilers in just a moment, but like the main crux of the movie is Julianne Moore's character is named Poppy, and she is the CEO essentially of the biggest drug cartel in the world. And she has, over time, felt really sort of disenchanted with the whole thing because she's stuck in her like base in Nicaragua or somewhere in South America, in some ruins. She's mad that like she's not taken seriously as a business leader, as a CEO, and she wants to basically force the hand of everybody to allow her illegal drugs to become legal, so she can be a legitimate businesswoman and go on and so forth. Standing in her way, obviously, are Kingsman, and so she goes to great lengths to put them out of their misery. And the whole kind of movie hinges on her plan, which is to infect, basically take the drugs that she's put out there and hold every drug user hostage, unless all illegal drugs are legitimized. And so Eggsy and the team have to stop it. How much do we go into the Kings? Well, at some point, something happens to the Kingsmen, causing Eggsy and Merlin to team up. They come to America and seek the help of the Statesmen, which are sort of at one point, a group of rich Americans, had a contact with Kingsman and got the idea from like one of the Kingsman tailors. So they set up their own branch under the guise of a whiskey distillery called Statesman Whiskey, which is kind of funny. And I did like all of that. that was fun, right? It was
corny as it was.
It was a little bit Home Alone 2 Lost in New York, but at the same time, it worked. For what it was, it worked. So it's like they come here, and then that sort of sets the main story in motion. And then everybody's trying to stop Poppy, and again, once that sort of is put in play, it's very reminiscent of the first one, where just like a James Bond movie, the quirky villain has like a master plan, and the agents have to stop them, and really not more complicated than that. But
Right.
there's all this other, what is complicated is that there's all these wonderful little character moments that happen that are super organic to the story and really make good use of those actors. And I was really, really pleased with that. I guess, let me throw something out there that's kind of spoilery, but not really, because she's in the trailers too. One of the things we see right off the bat is, and it was especially cool because it was such a throwaway, it was a funny moment, but it was a throwaway moment for the first one. If you recall in the first one, after Eggsy saves the world, he and Princess Tildy unite in her cell, and there's a really fun little kind of crazy moment. Well, Princess Tildy ends up being a major character in this one. She's Eggsy's girlfriend, and like they're seriously dating, and it was like really fun to see it. It was a non-James Bond thing to do, right? Like in any other James Bond movie, that girl you would never see her or hear her again, and she
right.
Maybe mention like haphazardly in like a throwaway line or something in a future movie.
Yeah, it would be like the Royal Navy has to come rescue her from this dirty, secret agent who's
exactly,
he's got her on a boat and is having his way with her or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was like a legitimate 3-dimensional relationship. Like I genuinely cared for both of those characters. That was great.
He goes and meets her parents, for God's sake, and and there's a bunch of moments throughout the movie where she grounds him. Like, there's should we just call spoilers now so we can get into
no let's push through this. Let's talk about cast and everything. Because I really want it to be like I really think if you're interested in this kind of thing, you ought to go see the movie and go
definitely
as pure as possible. Well, let's add that to our spoiler section though. But as we mentioned before, or I'll let you add it to the spoiler section and I'll vamp a little bit.
Okay.
As we mentioned before, one of the great things is this cast of not only Tildy, but all the statesmen that we already sort of named, Jeff Bridges and Channing Tatum and Pedro Pascal. It was a very rich cast, and it was different enough from the first. Like the only thing that felt a little forced to me was why the American involvement, but once they were involved, well, actually, no, that's not true. The way they got to America, I just thought all that was great. It was only in the sort of concept of like, why do they need to team up with them? But then they end up not really, it ends up being, it's not like two teams getting together, it's much more like when Felix Leiter would go help James Bond. That's what I thought was cool. It's just that we happen to see some of the administration, Merlin gets to team up with Halle Berry, whose code name is Ginger Ale. All the statesmen have drink names. Jeff Bridges being called Champagne, I thought was a little ridiculous, but I like that he's like, but just call me Champ. But at Pedro Pascal, we already mentioned, but dude, he looks so much like Burt Reynolds with this corny mustache.
Even the attitude. I mean, it's like I was half expecting to start like chewing on gum like Norm Macdonald from those SNL sketches.
Exactly.
He had the demeanor, everything, and that had to be planned, right? That had to be like, hey, we really want you to do your best, Burt Reynolds, and we're just gonna.
Well, definitely, because then when they go to the ski resort, which there's like a plot thing where they're at the ski resort, and they've got him in like the ski pants that when they're unzipped at the bottom look like bell bottoms. And he's wearing a cowboy hat, and he's got this corny mustache, and it's just, but he does such a good job in that when we discuss in the spoiler section about Channing Tatum's role, that's where I just can't even believe it, because Pedro is like his own dude in this movie, and it is awesome. He's really the only one. I could just talk about him for the rest of the episode. He was so good. But should we hit some non-spoiler favorite moments? Like what's one of yours?
I think that opening sequence, definitely, because that really put me in the mood. You're like, okay, here we go. I would think, honestly, anything involving Colin Firth's character was just magical. Like that dude, I mean, he brought a level of acting and sort of sincerity and earnestness to a character in a ridiculous movie, right? Where it's like everything is over the top, everything is just like amped up. Here are these like really nice, personable little intimate character moments that just shine like crazy, and it's all Colin Firth. And he does that thing that kind of Tom Hanks does, where he just brings out the best in everybody who's around him. So immediately, like Eggsy's acting goes up, Mark Strong's acting goes up. There is I would say equally anything involving Mark Strong, like anything involving Merlin.
I love that guy. Yeah.
And there's some spoilery moments we'll get into, but like I would say anything involving those two, just absolutely fantastic. I love all of that.
Am I wrong in that Merlin and Mark Strong's character Merlin was, I mean, he was a huge part of the first one,
Absolutely.
but I didn't feel for him as much in the first one as in this one. And I know it's just that there's a lot of bonding between him and Eggsy, but he was just given a bigger role in this is my impression. I mean, maybe he was just as huge in the first one, but
he was big, but he was big from a more utility player sort of standpoint.
Yeah,
right?
he was just like a cool Q. And
exactly.
This one, it's like if Q is made an agent, you know?
Exactly. The thing that Mark Strong does in every movie he's in, though, is that he ups the charm factor by like 10 or 20%. Because it's just like you watch a scene with any other actor and you're like, that was fine. But with Mark Strong in it, even if he's not asked to do much, the way he just does something with his characters where you're just like, you kind of feel endeared to him, even if he's not driving the story. You're just like, I like this guy. Like, I really want more with this guy and I want him to succeed and I want everybody to like him. You know, it's just, it becomes, he does that and he does that again in this one, but they take really, really good advantage of that. Right.
Oh, for sure. I'll tell you one of my favorite moments is without spoiling anything about it. There's a amazing bar fight scene in the first one. And there's a parallel to that in this one that shows off Pedro Pascal. And it's like one of those things where in just the, couple of moves, you learn so much about that character's specialties and stuff like that. And the way it's done is with this like humor, but also this like, just just those moments between Mark Strong and Eggsy, who's the actor who portrays him. I have no idea what his name is. And Colin Firth. Egerton. Those three guys like in that bar scene, just like, it's like they just bond while you're also watching this amazing action scene. And then honestly, like we already mentioned, so many of my favorite scenes were just with Tildy. I thought so much of that was like just so well done. Just everything about it was cool. Watching Eggsy and Tildy hang out with like, his mates who are, basically in like the public housing kind of, or at least like a kind of dingy apartment. And then going from that to having dinner with her parents in the castle.
Did you notice, by the way, I'm glad you brought that up. So like something I kind of noticed in that sequence, it's almost like they're painting Eggsy and he even does it with his voice. Like when he's Eggsy, he's dressed as Eggsy. His voice is that. And then when he's Galahad, he puts on the suit, he almost affects a different, more sophisticated accent. And like Tildy knows his secret identity. Yeah. Kind of cool. And they're not explicit with that, like, which I appreciate. They like no one comes on screen and like says that, but it's like, it was just cool seeing her hanging out in his like, in his like secret identity layer. It's like, this is me, but she knows he's this other crazy superhero kind of like figure.
And presumably like his friends know he's dating like the princess of Sweden or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, and actually that was something, I love that we're talking about this because it's making me enjoy all these moments even more. I think that was something that kind of bothered me from the first movie, was feeling like, they didn't, I don't know. I think they did a good job of it in retrospect, but just my experience watching the first movie, I felt like I'm just not going to buy this guy as this Kingsman. And I always, I just didn't like that. It's like this whole idea of like, you got to dress up and act proper and stuff like that. I just didn't like it.
You didn't want him to become that completely.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a moment at the, without, again, no spoilers, but there's a moment at the end of this between Eggsy and Galahad where it all connected for me at the end of the Kingsman 2. And that I think made it worth it, like sort of in that whole character journey of like, I get it. Like it's connected now, and but you're right. That's that what that actor does when he's, talking to his friends versus the way he acts in the Kingsman suit it's really well done.
Yeah.
Let's talk about because we can talk about this without spoilers, the franchise from here.
Yeah. I don't think we can talk about that without spoilers, honestly.
Okay. Well, then let's say it. This is the spoiler alert section, big flashing sign. Don't proceed if you have not seen Kingsman 2, or if you don't want to go in like just being totally spoiled, but we're going to talk about all the spoilery stuff right now. So
3,
go away, come back to this. You're
1.
gonna count us down.
Boom.
Spoilers.
So Channing Tatum, let's start with that.
Oh yeah, I love this because I didn't realize that. And there's this, so he goes into a coma like immediately, and I'm like, what the fuck? Why would you hire Channing Tatum and then literally just put him in a coma?
Right? It's a little shocking. Well, and part of me kind of harkened back to Hateful Eight, where I was like, well, Channing Tatum, and spoilers, Channing Tatum in Hateful Eight has a significant but very minor role. So I'm like, well, maybe it's like that, where they brought him in.
If he had died, it would have made sense. But it was like, no, they just like they keep cutting back to him just lying on a bed.
Yeah. It's interesting. Well, hang on a second here. There we go. But it's you meet him like, so he's the one that sort of, when Eggsy and Merlin are trying to break into Statesman headquarters, he's the one that they meet first, and he sort of intercepts them, and then he's the one that actually shows them Colin Firth. So right away you kind of get a sense of him, and then like you don't get to see him anymore, and then all of a sudden it's almost like everything he would have done is handed off to Pedro Pascal. So it makes sense that that his part was split. And I even think that later on when he's infected and he's doing, he progresses to stage 2, where he's dancing uncontrollably. Like, I honestly think that scene was just going to be some random agent of Statesman, like dancing in the hallway. So they're like, okay, we got to give him something. So like all that in the script, let's shift that to Channing's character. And I bring all this up, and I said that when you asked if where the franchise goes from here, I really think the scheduling stuff with Channing Tatum has changed considerably where the franchise is going to go. Because if you think about if Whiskey's character was supposed to be both of those guys at once, Channing Tatum would have died at the end. So the fact that he's now in London, potentially as part of Kingsman, that changes. And I almost think that they did that because like, okay, man, we didn't get you in. We couldn't get you in the full time this time. So you're going to be in the third one in a much more major capacity. So it's interesting that happened. I honestly, though, I think if what they should have done, Whiskey should have been Pedro Pascal from the beginning and not split up. I think that would have been so much cooler. And Channing Tatum could have showed up later on in another capacity. Right. I really feel like you nailed it. Like Pedro Pascal was so great, and you wanted to know more about him. And he almost like kind of fit that.
And you do. That was one of the cool things, is that they have that like little girlfriend or the wife moment, or the girlfriend or whatever, and his kid. It's like, you end up actively learning all about his character and really feeling for him.
And so it would have felt more, and he's like older than Taron Egerton, so it would have had a little of that Colin Firth vibe, where he's the American guy trying to show him the ropes and everything, only to betray him at the end. Like it would have made that moment too, where Colin Firth shoots him, and Eggsy's like, "What the hell were you doing?" Like, his one, his kind of new, uncle is being shot by his old uncle. It would have had more resonance if that had been a thread that they pulled all the way through. So again, it worked fine enough, but it would have had that extra special feeling if they had made it, if they had found a way to, and it's tricky, right? Because you don't want to cut Channing Tatum entirely. You want to, that is, if you're the PR team, you're like, we need him in the trailers and the posters, but what do you do? So I think where we go from here is you put him in it more, you make sure his schedule is completely cleaned out, and then you just really try to lean into something that's a little different from these first two movies. You try to find a narrative arc that's a little left of center that you wouldn't expect if you're a fan of the franchise. And
they could have, that comedy of like when Channing appears, he is so I don't really think it's too over the top, but it's on the edge there of like a Southern caricature.
He's definitely doing his best Gambit impression, which since he's not going to make that movie, it's like, might as well get it out of your system.
And so there's definitely some like comedy bits of, at the end of this movie, we see him in full Kingsman attire, even with the bowler hat, walking into the Kingsman tailoring service. I definitely think there's moments of comedy of him trying to. He's going to be worse at pretending to be an English gentleman than Eggsy. Yeah, definitely. And so between the two of them and Colin Firth, that's pretty rich, like comedic ground. So I'm at least hopeful that they can really make something of that. It's great to hear that explained that was he was originally supposed to be one character, but again, I wouldn't want to be without Pedro Pascal's character. That was just
right.
Perfect.
I know that was like they really made the best of a tight situation. If you think about it too, originally Taron Egerton was having scheduling problems because he was going to shoot Robin Hood first, and they're like, we need you for this. So they actually had to negotiate with the Robin Hood production crew to start later so that they could get Taron Egerton in this, which, I mean, this movie probably would have been another year or two delayed had that happened, or not happened rather. So I don't know. There's
honestly they could have gotten rid of Channing's role in this one, and the one I was more disappointed with was Halle Berry. I felt like was really kind of shoehorned in this.
Really didn't need her. Well, there's another sort of one of my other qualms about this movie is that I wish the Statesmen weren't note for note exactly like Kingsman.
Yeah,
I wish there was something a little different. Like even Jeff Bridges around the table, like just give me. And we were talking about this after the fact, like. It strains credibility to well, in a movie like this, it's kind of a weird thing to say, but like it does strain credibility to think, okay, it wasn't like you guys worked side by side for 50 years and then split off.
Right. We're
influenced by this one guy. So show us what the American version would have looked like had it, not known Kingsman was the way it was. Like, what would the Americans have done differently? Like we have seen. It's just the fact that they had literally a Merlin character wearing the same glasses who just happened to be a woman was like, well, okay, but.
Honestly, that was like that's maybe where that line about being parody, not satire, comes from, because that's where it becomes like a parody of 80s movies, 80s spy movies, where that's exactly what would have happened. Like there's two mirrored spy agencies. But I'm with you. Like there's no shortage of crazy details in Kingsman. They could have just dumped in a bunch more crazy details. I mean, like this is how the American crew runs, and it's different. I mean, we got some of that, but yeah, you're right.
But but then you have to also ask, like, maybe the intention was we want to be that sort of parody. Like that's the trope we're going to lean into. So of course we have to make them exactly like Kingsman. So it's that fine line, right? Of like, we want to homage this stuff. We want to sort of be meta and referential, but we also want to be our own thing. Yeah. There's a lot of different things this has to achieve. So I always go like, if I ever have a complaint with something, my first reaction is, well, what would I do differently? How would I? And a lot of times I have like a really great sort of scenario, but sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know. There's something else. And in this case, it's one of those things too. I'm like, well, what would I have done differently with the Statesman? I don't know.
I think, the only problem they have is that there were certain things where like, the Kingsman movies are so wild, just visually and storytelling and all the details in them. And I think what hurts them is when they do rely on those tropes, because what happens then is we're able to predict stuff, and like you see it from miles away that Halle Berry is going to replace Pedro Pascal there's like it's planted in this conversation with Merlin. And then at the end, like there's this weird little, Han Solo, Luke Skywalker kind of honors ceremony where she puts herself forward to get, a medal hung on her neck by Princess Leia. It's like, dude, what I just, that to me is like, I wasn't disappointed in it or anything. I just saw it coming.
Yeah.
And
she didn't do anything to earn it, right? Like we never see her being
right. Whereas
we never see her do cool things. Like she just hanging out with Merlin the whole time. I'm like, well, does she really know does she know what she's doing? Like, I don't.
Right. She's always behind the scenes. Merlin we see in the action. Mm-hmm. So if they had come to him and said, we're rebuilding the Kingsman and you are going to be a full field agent, it would have made sense.
Well, what I thought was going to happen, and I saw the telegraphing of Merlin's death coming. I didn't want it to happen.
Yeah.
The way they did it was the classiest, most amazing thing they could have ever possibly done. But I thought once it happened, I'm like, okay, so Halle Berry's going to be recruited over to be the Merlin of Kingsman now. Like that's right. I thought maybe they'll give her. She'll you get to be this over here. Because I felt like that conversation where she's like, yeah, whiskey always voted me down. And the fact that it's, a bunch of American dudes, I thought, well, where this is headed is that she really has no future here. So they'll bring her into the reconstituted Kingsman to take on Merlin's role. And so I don't know, there's a bunch of ways that could have happened. It was a little awkward. Had I done it again, I wouldn't have had her character exist at all. It's like, if you're going to cast Halle Berry, she's capable of more than just that.
Yeah.
It was a little stunt. I honestly
well, it's funny
cool to see her as the villain, or maybe she and Poppy somehow, like if you're going to put her in the movie, give us something completely unexpected. Give us something that we wouldn't ever see coming.
That would have been cool. Are there other deaths in the movie that we should mention?
Well, just the death of Merlin. I mean, just the fact that, oh God, and again, he has to charm your socks off in the first one for his death in this one to mean something.
Yeah.
And the fact that they really had some good moments, emotional moments with he and Eggsy. And the fact that and they even said it too, like, so when they were talking about Colin Firth's amnesia and Halle Berry's like, he needs a shocking moment to re-trigger all that. I thought, oh shit, where this is going to head is that scene in the first movie where Eggsy's dad jumps on the bomb. Like, there's going to be a moment. And I thought Colin Firth would have dementia basically through the whole thing. I was kind of surprised that they cured him as fast as they did. I thought we're literally, when she said that, I'm like, oh shit, what's going to happen is there's going to be a moment just like that where Eggsy's going to sacrifice him or try to, and Merlin's going to step in to take his place. So the fact that ended up happening anyway, even though it didn't connect to Colin Firth's amnesia, I was like, oh, so when Eggsy stepped on the landmine, I was like, oh shit, like it just hit me. And sure enough, when Merlin, stepped on it, and then he's like, this journey started when your father, sacrificed himself for us. And it's like the least I could do. I'm just like, oh man, it just, and then the fact that he was singing John Denver and the whole thing was just
that was so good.
I was tearing up. I was just like, God damn it, Mark Strong. You just, that was good. The other death that was annoying was the death of Roxy. I remember on IO9 prior to this, a lot of the comment sections, every time they talked about Kingsman was, if Roxy dies, I'm not going. Cause she was a great character in the first one. She deserved to have more to do in this one.
It's weird too, that in some ways, the Merlin character, the Tilda character, like they were built out so well.
Yeah.
And then things like Roxy, that first scene where she's in, you're like, oh man, this chick is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that's it.
Yeah.
Even like just a moment before her death, she's being kind of catty with him, and it's cool. And then, that was, I don't know.
I get why she had to die from a story sense. Like Eggsy needed,
they had to wipe out all of them. Right.
But give me a little bit more than just her sitting at a table with Michael Gambon, right? Like basically it was her at the table and her in the bedroom. So like they shot her on a day,
and just seated both times, not even walking around. Like
and so I'm like, at least make her, if I were to do that over, make her, have her show up to help Eggsy in the first one, like in that first sequence when he's fighting Charlie.
Oh yeah,
like have her roll up on a motorcycle or something and like join the fight. Like do something cool that really reminds us how badass she is, and then kill her off if you're going to do that, but give us something more,
Yeah.
I was a little happy to know that she wasn't, because there's a lot of speculation like, oh, she'll be like the double agent who betrays Kingsman. It's like, no, don't do that. And so I'm glad that didn't go down. I think just having, it was such a surprise and a delight to see Tildy brought back and fleshed out, Charlie brought back and fleshed out to some degree.
Yeah,
like
that was interesting.
It was like what would otherwise be throwaway moments in in other movies or even James Bond. Like they're like, no, we're gonna make this matter. I did like how they brought Colin Firth back. So like again, if we didn't know that wasn't going to happen, I think let's say they had kept that completely secret. When Eggsy and Merlin are sitting there drinking the whiskey and they're like, we got to go to Kentucky, immediately your mind goes, if you're a fan of the first one, your mind goes, wait a second, that crazy violent church was in Kentucky. That's where Colin Firth died. Wait a second. Like it started, even if I didn't know Colin Firth was in this movie, my mind would start to kind of go down that path of, I wonder, and so when they show, they show him shaving and then they show how they saved him, it made complete sense. It wasn't like, oh, we're based in Alaska and we just had to fly. Like they're just down the road. They could just they could get there in that amount of time. And the way they saved him to work, and just it all made really good sense. I was glad that they pieced it together.
And for whatever reason, like the fact that then, he does that to Pedro Pascal's whiskey character, like, shoots him in the head, and they use this, and Eggsy uses the same device to, stop the wound until they can treat him. It was like, that actually kind of legitimized it. Like, this is actually a technique that they use. It's not the James Bond, like Deus Ex Machina thing where it's like, it's the one secret potion that does it or whatever. If we're going to play like, fantasy, if we were remaking it or something, I would remake the marketing there and have those trailers have that line where Channing Tatum's like, are you here about the lepidopterist?
Oh,
and then just show them like where the two-way mirror starts to rise up, and it's like, oh, who is the lepidopterist, you know? And then just have it, granted, they don't hang on to that for too long, but there was a moment there where, you know, even though I knew like Colin, there's a scene of Colin Firth shaving in a mirror and they're going to see it. When they said lepidopterist, I'm like, what is this weird case that they're working, you know? If they could have played that out in the marketing a little bit more and made Colin Firth's reveal.
Well, it's funny though. I would have loved that because one thing as much of an attention to detail horror as I am, the one thing I never put two and two together on until much later in the movie, in the first one, his bathroom where his dog is hanging has butterflies all over the wall. And I never once thought, like, especially even when they revealed Colin Firth and they showed all the butterflies in his like kind of holding cell, like it never occurred to me, oh, that's right. That was a thing in the first one until I think once Eggsy was trying to, you know, kind of in his final gambit to try to bring his memory back, they showed a bunch of little cut shots of the bathroom and the dog. I was like, of course, that's that. So it's not like that was a stretch either. They really mined the first one and try to connect as much of that tissue as they could, which I really respect.
Yeah, they could. That's where this is not an English Fast and Furious. Is because Fast and Furious is like the details are fucked up all over the place. Like nothing lines up, you know? Whereas this one really, they're pardon me using this term, but they are Fast and Furious movies. Like they're wild. They go by, you know, the action moments are so quick, but there are those little details all along. And it's just, you know, it's not like a super brainy movie, but it's cool that they do stuff like that because that helps us as fans who are not super brainy, but not just, you know, dull action junkies. It was great. You know, there's one scene that you were about to spoil earlier, which is about Eggsy and Tilda's relationship.
Oh yeah. Oh, you mean when he's at Glastonbury?
Yeah.
So Eggsy goes to Glastonbury to tail basically Charlie's girlfriend. They need to plant a bug on her so they can follow her and hopefully have her lead them to Charlie and thus the Golden Circle. So he goes to Glastonbury, which is, if you don't know, it's like this big, you know, giant, it's basically Coachella in the UK. And he finds her and then he seduces her. It's funny. There's that funny little scene where Pedro Pascal tries to seduce her and just comes off like a creepy old man. And then Eggsy kind of comes to her rescue, seduces her, and then realizes the way to plant his bug is he has to have sex with her. Or at least, you know, get really intimate with her somehow. And so he breaks away and goes and calls Tildy and tells her this is what he's about to do. And he's like, hey, I'd rather you find out now than, you know, after the fact and I have to lie to you. It's like, I got to do this for Queen and Country, you know? And she's like, yeah, no. And it's not like she's like, well, I guess if you have to. She's legitimately not okay with this.
Of course,
you know,
right.
He does the deed as much as he can anyway, and then he kind of stops full, you know, before, you know, I think he basically gets to third base and then stops, which is
there's so many things about that. Like, so back to the call. So they're in a tent at Glastonbury. So he goes in the bathroom, which is just separated by a curtain, and then does like a FaceTime video chat with Tilda, which is ridiculous. But it like in the moment I was like, oh, that's just one of those silly Kingsman things. But it actually sort of pays off later because the distance between them, like how she gives him the cold shoulder after that, like definitely, you know, because again, from miles away, you're like, yeah, Tilda's gonna, you know, she's gonna get the disease, infected, whatever. There's a scene of her smoking a joint that's like clearly like, well, we've never seen that before. But that just having that distance between them, because I think it's on that phone call where she's smoking the joint.
She is. Well, no, wait, actually.
Or is it a later one?
I think that's later. No, I think that's later because he's trying to call her and text her, and she's not answering, and then you see her smoking. But like she pushes him. She's like, "Hey, you know," he says something that's kind of that kind of suggests that he's might ask her to marry him, and she's like, "Yeah, that's right. We need to do that." And he's like, "But look, I can't. I'm a secret agent. Like I can't be married to a
princess."
It's a little weird. And she's like, and so like later on that pays off, you know, in a pretty awesome way. And honestly, that last sequence with Colin Firth kind of, you know, standing with him before they go out to the wedding, like they just nailed that too. I mean, Colin Firth just
and that's exactly what I was talking about earlier in the non-spoiler section, where I think that character of like Eggsy as like the streetwise kind of punk, and then being able to play the role of a English gentleman, like, really comes together. Like, it's so funny to see him getting dressed for his wedding in the formal royal attire. And then the first line is like, do I look like a dick?
Yeah.
And I just was like, yep, that's it right there. The marriage of the two is right in that moment of like, now your whole character makes sense to me.
Yep.
But back to the fingering scene. So when Pedro Pascal shows this tiny little condom to Eggsy and explains that the tracking device is on it and it has to be like, in the mucous membrane, I was instantly like, oh, so this is like a finger condom and he has to finger this girl.
Yeah. That's what I thought too.
I didn't understand at all. That's one of the weird reasons where he was like, I got to make a phone call. I was like, I mean, not that you shouldn't confess to that as a secret agent or something. I just thought like, well, it's not like you're actually going to have sex with her, right? So it was weird. I don't know, because there's even a joke about how the condom is so small, and why Americans have to drive big trucks because whatever. Yeah. So anyway, it was just funny that I instantly thought like, well, that's a finger condom. And then when that moment actually happens, that shot from the POV of the was so it was such a perfect Kingsman shot of being like as vulgar as possible. And as funny as possible. I mean, I was laughing out loud as he keeps tracing down her body. I was like, no way. No way.
Yeah.
Just on this side of like pornographic, it doesn't go that far, but man, I was laughing out loud. That was
so many. I mean, again, the first that's what made the first one so delightful. Is just those holy shit moments, like, oh God, like, and just to see that they haven't shied away from that.
Were there any other holy shit moments that you can point to quickly?
Yes, yes. The meat grinder.
Oh man, that was another like mile away kind of call.
Well, I mean, the first time they showed it, I was like, oh God. But then like when Pedro Pascal was stuffed into it, I'm like, oh, because I'm like, I don't want him to go out that way, but it's, it is what it is. But that was a little shocking. There's another one. What was the other one? The Glastonbury tent. There's one more where I was like, oh Jesus. Shoot, what was it? It was when the camera was panning over the prison cells in the stadium, and then they show they just show like the blood just coming out of the person's eyes and orifices just like as they go into stage 4. You're like, oh, of course, and that just that's par for the course at this point in terms of what he does.
Well, just the fact that like there's a stadium on the outside and then just these like stacked high single cells for the people, the victims of it. That honestly, if there's anything that went too weird, it was that they made that president so like callous and uncaring. And there was a sort of a line about, from Julianne Moore about how she's like, well, he doesn't care about the citizens, and I felt like, that time and effort could have been devoted to maybe showing a little bit more about Poppy's backstory or, fleshing out her character. Like we didn't need another kind of bad guy.
Well, it's Bruce Greenwood too, right? So like Bruce Greenwood's always like the captain or the lead, like the trusted leader. So to see him basically doing his best, like George W. Donald Trump impression is like, it was just like, oh God, it was a little bit off-putting.
It just kind of comes out of nowhere where he's like just cruel all of a sudden. And not that is not something that, that president would be. It was just like,
But we went from the first one where like actually Barack Obama was president of the United States and like, was selling us out to Valentine. But we never see his face, right? But it's clearly him, to like all of a sudden we're going to show you the president and he's going to be just shitty, and this other woman who might be his chief of staff, it's very unclear what her role was. Like somehow it gets him in and again, part of it is that's how it was in those old Bond movies. Like we're not going to sweat those details. Like the details you care about are Colin Firth's amnesia and Eggsy's relationship. Like all the stuff that really mattered was really focused on the stuff that I mean, we're not going to, at this point, like who cares about really, I mean, it's a little annoying, but like we're not going to see, a realistic president portrayed in this way. It's
right.
It just is. It's just a plot device and we'll move on.
Yeah.
I also didn't quite care for I like that Elton John was the Mark Hamill of this, movie, but I feel like it almost they probably did a couple too many things with him. Like it just kind of felt like I loved, by the way, the callback when Colin Firth, like, if I save the world, can I have 2 tickets to your concert? And then he's like, if you save the world, you can have a backstage pass. Just that little callback to the first movie was really fun. Like little things like that. But I don't know, I kind of felt like they leaned a little too heavily on Elton John here and there. But it was fine.
That's a great thing to hear, because I actually, when he first appears and it's just like the cameo, I think I would have been more annoyed if he was just a cameo. The fact that it turned into him having like a much larger role was great to me. And the fact that like the dogs couldn't attack him. So when he comes out and saves Galahad in that way of like, he just gets in between him and the dog.
With the face.
So funny. And Elton was like a really good sport about it. Like it was all really good. So I actually really liked that.
He played miserable really well.
Yes, he did.
He played like when he's sitting there, like in between the 2 dog doors, he's just like all depressed and everything. Like, why am I here? I think, I don't know if we needed to see him like do these impossible fight moves, which is, clearly CGI.
Right.
Like, I don't know. That was probably why I was like a little too far, but you kind of needed, I think they're like, well, let's have him kick some ass too. Right. Like, okay, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and to do it in the 70s outfit with the platform heels, I think was.
Yeah. And that was a cool visual.
That was the humor for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, but then just the end of the day too, like how they beat Julianne Moore was a little anticlimactic. Again, all fine, all completely fine. But I'm nitpicking at this point, but just little things. What I want from the third one is for them to go, okay, the second one was the first one on steroids, because that's what everybody wanted. So here you go. Now the third one, we're going to I want them. So how do I want to explain this? The first one took me somewhere I didn't know where I wanted to go and ended up being one of my favorite places ever. The second one just took me back to that same place, which is great.
Right.
Like, I want the third one to take me somewhere completely new again. Like, hey, come over here. Like, oh my God, I had no idea I love this. So I don't want to just go back to the same amusement park a third time. I want to go to a different one. So hopefully they can give us.
No, that makes sense. And and hopefully they've got the Statesman and the Kingsman in a way where they can, there's not, I always like it when there's like team up movies.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hoping for in wherever it goes from here.
On that note, I think we've said everything we're going to say.
No kidding. I feel like we wrapped it up in a really good place there.
I guess if you want to hear the podcast like this or our other shows, you can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Pocket Casts, and you can also find us on Twitter and SoundCloud. Our handle is Find Us There, all one word, all lowercase. And you can also find us on our website, findusthere.org. You'll find our other shows, notes, reviews, all kinds of fun stuff, and we're actually process of sprucing that up a little bit. So findusthere.org. Todd, anything else from you?
No, that's it. Next week we'll have another episode, and it will probably be coffee and comics that we'll be talking.
Sounds good. Well, it's been a pleasure. We'll talk to you all later.